Okay, I should also give you an important piece of information, and that is around the time that I first started learning HTML and CSS, I began attending coding meetups. So I went to meetup.com, meetup.com, and I found this to be an excellent resource for meeting other developers in my area, and see if your area has this as well. So there was this meetup called Open Code, right? And it was 10 minutes away from my house at a coding boot camp called The Iron Yard. It no longer exists, but it was a very successful, the location I went to was very successful. They had locations all throughout the country. The whole company shut down, unfortunately, but the one that's right down the street from my house, 10 minutes away, was one of the most successful locations. They've since opened up another coding school. A lot of the teachers that went to that taught at the Iron Yard, and they opened up their own coding school called Suncoast Developers Guild. Check it out. It's in Tampa, Florida, or more specifically, it's in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is near Tampa, Florida, which is where I live. So I went there. They had open code every single Wednesday. There were students there that were currently attending the boot camp, so I spoke to them, got some knowledge from them. I was like, "What are you working on? What are you guys doing? And then I could just teach myself some of the stuff that they were learning for free. But I went there consistently every single Wednesday for as long as they were open, for like over probably like a year and a half or something, right? Every single Wednesday I networked. Huge if you want to actually land a job. It's huge. You want to get out there and network. You want to get out there and talk to other coders that are learning or that are far more advanced than you, that could possibly become your mentor. You're like, hey, I'm confused. I don't know what track to take. I know that was like a confusion for me when I first started out. Maybe I'll make another video on that. That'd be a good one. It was a good meetup. So I went there. The purpose of Open Code was to open up your laptop, code in the presence of other programmers, talk to each other about what you're working on. Like, hey, I'm working on my portfolio site. You want to check it out and just give me some feedback, see if you see anything that looks bad, and then they'll look at it. They're like, whoa, I like that you did that. How did you do that with JavaScript? Or they'll say, oh, you could use some work on that section. I don't know if an employer will like that. Usually they don't say that, but some people do. So good place to go network, right? Fun fact, I would say 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years before I got my first coding job, at the meetup, Open Code, I met my engineering manager today, 2 years ago. Did I know I was going to be working underneath him? No, I had no idea. But guess what? I formed that connection. I had him as a contact. I actually saved his information as a contact, and I contacted him later, and it really worked out. We'll tell you about that later. But also, I met several friends. I met a couple of mentors from Open Code that I stayed in contact with throughout my learning experience before I got my first job. And I would say, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, what do you think about that? I'll send them some code sometimes and say, I can't get this to work. Can you help me out? They would help me out and send some stuff that works back, and explain to me what I did wrong so I could become a better developer. Honestly, I believe you're a developer the moment you start developing. And that's not like professionally at a job. I'm talking about the moment you start building a website with a programming language, because there's designer where it's HTML, CSS, that's design. Once you introduce JavaScript on the front end, you're doing development. If you're doing anything back end, you're doing development for the most part. So you're a developer from the moment you start developing, right? Okay, so now that I got the meetup stuff out of the situation, I went there every single Wednesday, networked, talked to people, say, hey, what are you working on? That's a huge one. Talk to other people. Just open up the conversation by saying, so what are you working on? Oh, what are you working on? I'm working on this. And then that's how you get a conversation going. Then you say, hey, can I get your number? Maybe we could meet up and talk about some code sometime. Or are you going to be here next Wednesday? Because I'm going to be here next Wednesday. Huge, right? Huge. Do that, please. That's like one of the biggest things you can do for yourself. So if you do that, you teach yourself code consistently, you're going to be good. You're going to be 100% good. All right, so HTML, CSS, building tons of ugly portfolios. Got into JavaScript, right? I used several different resources for JavaScript. I believe I bought John Duckett's JavaScript book. I didn't make my way cover to cover in that book. That book is thicker than the HTML and CSS book, and I don't know. I think JavaScript is tricky. It was tricky coming from just a little bit of Python, and if I didn't do the little bit of Python, I think JavaScript would have been even more difficult. Just because the syntax is a little tricky to wrap your head around at first, for me. Not so for everyone, but for me it was a little tricky to wrap my head around. So the JavaScript John Duckett book didn't really work out so well. I probably got a quarter of the way through that, and then I was like, I gotta find some other resources. So I did some YouTubing around. I took several different resources. I took anything from Udemy, however you pronounce that, lynda.com. I did Team Treehouse. I did Stefan Mischuk, this guy named Stefanmischook, Stefan Mischuk. He's an awesome guy. I think it's webmentor.org. I took some of his JavaScript stuff. It's pretty cool. I think I already mentioned this, but YouTube. Lots of YouTube JavaScript stuff, just different concepts like how to write an if statement in JavaScript, how to write a while loop, how to write a for loop, how to write a function, what's a prototype, what's a factory function, there's tons, right? Don't get overwhelmed. You can do it. Just take it one step at a time. Enjoy the process. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, as my engineering manager would say. So take your time. Learn it, because you're building foundations. You're building the foundations of the web, which is what potentially your entire career could be based off of. That could be your limiting factor, right? So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I took the front end first approach. Could go back end if you would like first, or could just do front end and nothing else, or could just do back end, nothing else, or it could be a full stack web developer like I am. All right, so it was around this point I was doing HTML, CSS, JavaScript for my own portfolio sites again. I built so many freaking portfolio sites, I can't even tell you, but because I thought like, oh, these really matter. And I guess I didn't really have a whole lot of ideas for what to build for an app. And this is a very common thing. Like, I know lots of people they're like, I don't have any ideas, so I don't know what to do for a personal project. Now I actually have a really good personal project going. I'll share it with you guys later. I'm really passionate about it, and it'll be very useful to me, and I feel like other people. But did that. Got to this point. I would say this is probably, I spent quite a bit of time on just JavaScript, HTML, and CSS too. So I think this is probably maybe like a year or so in to me first coding. Meanwhile, I'm still in college full time. I'm still working at the restaurant 35 hours Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Have to make some money here and there, you know. And then my uncle approached me. He does lawn maintenance and lawn spraying, lawn care, total lawn care, lawn spraying, lawn maintenance. So he's like, hey, I heard you know how to build some websites. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. I know some HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I know some front-end stuff. That's just jargon to him. He has no idea what that is. I didn't have any idea what that was a year before he contacted me. But, so he's like, hey, I need a website for my business. Small company. It's only him. He's like, I want a page that tells people what we're about, has my phone number, has my name, has my, my email. He says, I want a blog. So I was like, whoa, blog. So I was thinking, blog, that's going to be server-side. I don't have any server-side experience as of right now. But I was like, yeah, let's do it. Right? So then I thought about it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to need an administrative login area where he can create blogs and edit his blog posts and delete them, do CRUD operations. Create, read, update, delete. That's a database term. Very common, CRUD. Create, read, update, delete. So I knew HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And I'm like, what could I do? What should I do for the server side? So Node was an up and rising platform at the time. It's not a framework, it's a platform. So Node. I knew nothing about databases. So I was like, okay, Node, Express, MongoDB, that was like a popular stack. It's because it's like the mean stack or the MERN stack. I just took the front end framework out. So instead of Mongo Express, no Angular, but Node, that's what I did. So I did the MEN stack in a way. Or sometimes there's Mongo Express React and Node. Well, I did the Mongo Express and Node portion of things because I wasn't ready to jump into a front-end framework at the same time as doing learning server-side for the first time. All right, so Uncle's website. I built everything that he asked for. I built it with HTML, CSS, JavaScript on the front end, and Bootstrap. At this point, I was leveraging Bootstrap so I can bang out some quick UI and not so much 90s ugly-looking CSS. I could actually take some components, I can shape the components, style the components, do whatever I want with them, but I at least have a good bare bones, out of the box thing to use, to leverage, rather than creating everything from scratch. Bootstrap has built-in responsive design. Equivalencies to Bootstrap CSS frameworks are Foundation, are Google's Material. There's several others. You don't have to use Bootstrap. I find in the workplace, though, I think Bootstrap is the most popular CSS framework currently. But there are other places that use them, and if you learn one, you can pick up others very quickly. It's not bad. So I built his site, I launched it. I had my buddy who I met at Open Code, who is he's been coding since he was 11. He was 22 at the time. He helped me deploy it onto AWS. So he spent a few hours just configuring AWS from scratch. Like, he's AWS certified. So that was huge. He helped me out. And my uncle has a site, and it helped out in a long time. It played a bigger role because during the job interview process for my first job, I actually showed that as my what I built. I'm like, hey, look, I built this site for my uncle. He wanted a blog, he wanted this, he wanted that. I built it using this stack, which is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Node, Express, and MongoDB. And I showed him the admin area. I showed him you can delete blogs, you can create blogs. And that's what I showed during the interview process. I busted out my laptop. I brought my backpack with my laptop in it to the interview so I can be prepared like that and show, like, hey, check it out. Right? I showed other people code for it, and it was a great learning experience, right? So that was the path I took. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I did that stuff. I went to meetups. So turns out, how did I get that first job interview at this point, right? So a buddy of mine who was a mentor, who I met at Open Code, this is totally separate from the AWS guy. Like, this is really huge. Meetups are huge. Different buddy than the AWS guy. He, in my Slack group, saw a job posting, and he actually spoke to the person like, hey, I have a buddy of mine who's looking for a job. I, at this point, haven't had any coding like job experience other than building my uncle's website. I think I charged my uncle like $200 too, just because I want to see what it felt like to get a little bit of money from coding. And $200 was a steal because I spent several hundred hours on that site building it, to be honest. Maybe like 200 hours building it, because it was my first real site that I was trying to make look professional and act professional. Hey, I have a friend who's a developer who is looking for a job. And he told me this. So after he told me that, I was like, hey, you should reach out to a guy who's looking to hire. So I slacked the guy. I'm like, hey, so-and-so, I heard you're looking for a developer. Well, can I send you my resume or something like that? And he was like, yeah, send me your resume. I'll look it over. I sent him my resume. I think later that day or maybe the next day, he was like, okay, I looked over your resume. It looks good. Let's get you in here for a job interview. This was the first job interview I've ever had as a developer, right? So I went to the job interview. I dressed the part. I got there really early. I was probably like 30 minutes early. I always get to places pretty early when it comes to that kind of serious thing. I walked in. I stood up as straight as I could. I was very courteous. I was in the parking lot 30 minutes before trying to kill my nerves because I was really nervous. So I was walking around just trying to calm my nerves. So I was really calm the time I went in. I was prepared. I filled out their applications. I sat down at the interview table. He asked me basic questions: how long I've been coding for, are you in school, do you have any projects, stuff like that. I showed him my uncle's website. He liked it. I think I had a couple more interviews after that, like little light assessments, and I got the job, right? I got the job. So in a nutshell, that was the path I took. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I would love to answer them. I'm sure this video is getting kind of long. This was the first in-depth video that I've ever done, so I hope it was enjoyable. I know I did a lot of over here, over there thoughts, because in the middle of my conversation, things were popping into my head like, oh wait, chronologically, this should fit over here, that should fit over there. So, thank you very much. I hope this feedback was useful. Please give me a like and subscribe. It would really help me out. And yeah, thanks guys.